welcome to Candy Bomber. I hope that you will subscribe and like the video. Napoleon Bonaparte in 1812 said about his disastrous invasion of Russia, "From the sublime to the ridiculous is but a step." For he had gone from the master of Europe to pretender once again, all within the space of a Russian winter on the Eurasian steppe. The Polish general Mikhail Sokolniczy, who was born in 1760 in Wierzega, in 1816 in Warsaw, was a Polish nobleman, general, military engineer, politician, and writer. Sokolniczy studied in Warsaw's Corps of Cadets and fought in the Polish-Russian War of 1792, as well as the Kosciuszko Uprising of 1794. In October 1797, he sent to the French Directory a document with the title Vision of Russia. Later it was popularly known as the Testament of Peter the Great. In October 1812, Charlie Louis Lesueur, founder of the magazine The Historic Directory, published this text that we just mentioned, one of the most influential in the history of Russophobia, under the title Progress of Russian Power. The Testament of Peter the Great, which was inserted by Lesueur, has enjoyed uninterrupted popularity and has been quoted thousands of times and used on various historical occasions. Yet it is little or known nothing to the public opinion of the English-speaking world today. Subsequently, General Sokolniczy admitted writing the document, but claimed it came from spying on Russian documents he came by chance. Napoleon Bonaparte made it widely publicized, this document, to prove that Europe is inevitably destined to be Russia's spoils. Absolutely deluded about what Russia really was, Napoleon launched a disastrous military campaign that destroyed his army and his country and his empire. It is a path that, from time to time, is traveled by various Western nations and its leaders, driven by the infinite capacity of self-deception typical of Europeans. It always ends the same way. The current crisis in Crimea, Ukraine, will give us the opportunity to attend to one of these excursions of European folly, live and directly. The Testament of Peter the Great returned to circulate with great fanfare during the Crimean War. That was 1853, and between 1853 and 56. The English made wide use of it. Napoleon III aimed to reassert French power and influence in Europe and around the world. In Europe, he allied with Britain, injected themselves, that is, in a war between the Ottomans and Russia, and and defeated Russia in the Crimean War 53-56. Now remember, this was a war between the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire in Eastern Europe, Black Sea. To note that Russia was not at war with either Britain or France, but with the Ottoman Empire, and that there was no direct threat to either France or Britain or Western Europe as a whole or in its part. Napoleon III of France, and of course at that time they had evolved another version of another empire, ordered that it be exhibited, that is the testimony or the will of Peter the Great, that it be exhibited in all public buildings in Paris and throughout France, and thousands of copies were printed for them. The French. It is evident the forgery of a will attributed to Peter the Great, according to which the late Tsar traces the manifest destiny of Russia for successive generations. This is none other than the taking over of all of Europe. It is this thaumaturgical plan that secretly moves Russia. Let me give some examples. In history, the Moneta Secreta of the Jesuits, Moneta Secreta, a code of instructions alleged to be addressed by Senor Aquaviva, the fifth general of that society, to its various superiors, and laying down the methods to be adopted for the increase of its power and influence. This is the Jesuits. According to them, every means is to be employed of acquiring wealth for the order of the Jesuits by enticing promising young men to enter and endow it with their estates. Rich widows are to be cajoled and dissuaded from remarriage. Every means is to be used for the advancement of the Jesuits to bishoprics or other ecclesiastical dignities, and to discredit the members of other orders within the Church, the Catholic Church, while the world is to be persuaded that the society is animated by the purest and least interested motives. The reputation of those who quit it is to be assailed and trashed in every way. This known work was of one Jerome Zaharovsky, a Pole, who, having been a member of the society, had been discharged for misuse of monies and other immoral acts in 1611. They first appeared in Krakow in 1612. This fraud would mark the beginning of the external and internal Church Cold War, Catholic Church, on the Jesuit order, which ended in its decline in importance for more than a century, a couple of centuries, until the surprise election of the Jesuita Pope Francis I, who is Pope today. Here's another example. The secret plans of the Spanish Inquisition in the 17th century. Its origin goes back to the Enlightenment of the 18th century, which continued to purport the Spanish Black Legend all the way into the 19th century. And another Spanish exile, Juan Antonio Llorente, former secretary of the Holy Office in Madrid, became the best diffuser of the Black Spanish legend. He wrote critical history of the Spanish Inquisition. a work that contains some interesting elements alongside numerous spectacular blunders of a statistical nature. It is salient to note that he became the ecclesiastical right arm of Napoleon Bonaparte, the first Emperor of Europe, in his invasion of Spain, for which he is still loathed in Spain today, both Napoleon and our, our Spanish traitor, who escapes me at the moment, Juan Antonio Llorente. I think I'd remember that. For his own vengeance at dismissal after the failed invasion of Spain, he was dismissed from all his positions. Of course, what did he retaliate? Fraud, a fraudulent document, a fraudulent book, and this was his weapon. Lastly, but not least, the Protocols of Sion. I'm sure some of you have heard of that one. Protocols of the Elders of Sion is another one, or the Protocols of the Meetings of the Learned Elders of Sion, formerly, is a fabricated anti-Semitic text purporting to describe a Jewish plan for global domination. The hoax was plagiarized from several earlier sources. It was first published in Russia in 1903. Yes, Russians can and do ethnic and religious phobia propaganda themselves, translated into multiple languages and disseminated international in the early part of the 20th century. It played a key part in popularizing belief in an international Jewish conspiracy. So we see that nations have cultural wars that span centuries, decades, years, and this is not an isolated fact. And that we must realize that we live in an age of culture and conflict and have been for centuries. After the Napoleonic Wars, anti-Russian propaganda continued. The former confessor of Napoleon, priest, Dominic Georges Frederic Dufour de Prat, I believe it's correctly pronounced, Prat, he was abbot, Abbé Dominique G.F. de Rion de Proac de Fort de Fort de Prat. He was born on 23rd of April 1759 in Avanches, Avignon, I believe, in France, and he died in 18th of March 1837 in Paris. Was a French clergyman and ambassador. Now, in 1804, he became a secretary of Napoleon himself. In 1805, became Bishop of Poitiers. On the 12th of May, in 1808, he was appointed as Archbishop of Michelin and resigned from the position in 1815 when Napoleon met his Waterloo. In 1812, he was awarded the position of the French ambassador in Warsaw, preparing the famous Concord of 1813 between nations. In the Concord documents, his assessments of Roger the Russian, of Russia stood out in it, to him, and for his audience at the time, Russia was a despotic Asian nation hungry to conquer all of Europe. Many men from the cultural establishment came to warm up at the bonfire of this anti-Russian propaganda, Russophobia. Some unexpected Gustave Doré, in his name in full is Paul Gustave Doré, born January the 6th, 1832 in Strasbourg, France, and died January 23 in 1883 in Paris. A famous French printmaker of images, one of the most prolific and successful book illustrators of the late 19th century. Gustave Doré's lofty romantic style is transformed into sheer tawdry in his History of Holy Russia, a printed book of printed plates, a collection of the images he brought to print in 1854. Crimean War, a crude and vulgar as the Lutheran pamphlets to the Dutch organists during the start of the Reformation. Headless soldiers fighting, drunken barbarians, old women in harsh witchcraft attire, and other caricatures of this sort made up Doré's published album. He's not the only one. Many others were printed, such as the Cossacks to laugh at them, I gather, or charge the Russians. Yes, let's charge them with all the bad inequities of the world, as well as monetary ones as well. Apparently Europe is doing that at the moment, trying to charge Russia again for, let's see if it works. It is urgent to ridicule the Russians with an urgency directly proportional to the environment that inspires the possibility of their winning the war. This is the Crimean War, mid-19th century. To end, Turkish historian Candan Badem wrote in his book, The Ottoman Crimean War, 1853 to 1856. Badem's book is from 2010. To quote him, the victory in this war did not bring any significant material gain for the Ottoman Empire, not even a war indemnity. On the other hand, the Ottoman treasury was nearly bankrupted due to war expenses. Badem adds that the Ottomans achieved no significant territorial gains, lost the right to a navy in the Black Sea, and failed to gain status as a great power, which it was until then. Further, the war gave impetus to the union of the Danubian principalities and ultimately to their independence. In other words, the Ottoman empires eventually lost their Eastern European territories and their influence around the Danube and around the Black Sea because of this war. So, in other words, the Crimean War was as purported by Western historians and Westerners of the time, and even now, and it was a failure, it was a defeat for Russia in Eastern Europe. It was originally a war against the Ottoman Empire. How did that war end for the Ottoman Empire? It was a loss. So the Russians took this war as a failure. However, in the consolation for Russia, but not for the Ottomans, was that this marked the decline, the permanent and irrevocable decline of the Ottoman Empire, which was dissolved in 1918. So it is fraught. It is fraught to actually assume that even when Russia loses, that another great power doesn't at the same time lose. And I believe, or I perceive that the same will happen this time. That another great power at the moment will lose and go into decline, at least in global hegemony. In the case of Europe, in the face of all this enormity that we have been relating, contrast the reverential respect that Russia still has and has always shown for Western Europe and Western European culture, and more specifically, for reasons unknown to me, for French culture and French history. It is without doubt that that may change. I thank you for attending, and we will have another episode coming up. You can catch up with me on Twitter and other platforms as I add them. Thank you.